In part 1, we explored how the Cold War gave birth to one of the strangest intelligence programs in history. The United States feared that if the Soviet Union was seriously investigating psychic abilities, it could not afford to ignore the possibility. Scientists at the Stanford Research Institute began testing individuals who claimed they could perceive distant locations using only their minds. Now the real question begins: who were these people? How were they tested? And did they ever produce intelligence that was accurate enough to surprise the US government? Welcome back to the extraordinary world of Project Stargate. Contrary to popular movies, remote viewers were not placed in futuristic laboratories surrounded by flashing lights and complex machines. The sessions were surprisingly simple. A participant would enter a quiet room with only a notebook, blank paper, and an interviewer. The viewer was not told the target. Instead, they received only a random number or code that corresponded to a hidden location or object. The theory was that giving too much information would influence the person's imagination. The viewer was encouraged to relax and describe only the first impressions that entered their mind. Sometimes those impressions came as shapes, sometimes as colors, sometimes as emotions, sometimes as temperatures or textures. The interviewer carefully avoided asking leading questions. Everything the viewer said was written down exactly as spoken. Afterward, analysts compared the notes with the actual target. Supporters argued that this blind process reduced bias. Critics responded that the interpretations remained highly subjective and could easily be influenced after the fact. One of the earliest and most controversial remote viewers was Pat Price, a former California police officer. Price quickly attracted attention because researchers believed some of his sessions contained surprisingly specific details. One famous story claims that Price described a highly classified Soviet-related installation with details that appeared to match intelligence already known to the US government. Supporters viewed this as strong evidence that remote viewing might work. Skeptics argued something very different. Many of the details were general enough that they could fit multiple locations. Some information could not be independently verified. And because much of the evidence remained classified for years, outside scientists could not properly evaluate the claims. Even today, historians disagree about how impressive Price's performance actually was. Perhaps the most famous participant in Project Stargate was Joseph McMoneagle, a retired US Army intelligence officer. Inside the program, he became known as Remote Viewer No. 001. McMoneagle participated in hundreds of operational sessions over many years. He has stated publicly that remote viewing sometimes provided useful clues that helped intelligence analysts. Importantly, McMoneagle has never claimed that remote viewing was perfect. Instead, he described it as an imperfect tool that occasionally produced valuable information when combined with conventional intelligence. This distinction is important. Even some supporters acknowledge that remote viewing was never accurate enough to replace satellites, reconnaissance aircraft, or human intelligence agents. At best, they argued, it could generate leads that investigators might later confirm using traditional methods. Throughout the Cold War, reports continued suggesting that the Soviet Union was conducting its own research into psychic phenomena. Exactly how extensive that research was remains debated. Some Soviet scientists explored telepathy and human perception. Some military-related projects reportedly examined whether unusual mental abilities might have intelligence applications. Because both superpowers kept much of their work secret, rumors often spread faster than verified facts. Ironically, some historians argue that each side partly continued its own research because it believed the other side might be making progress. Fear became self-reinforcing. Neither government wanted to be the one that ignored a revolutionary breakthrough. One of the most unusual documents associated with the program involved what has become known as the Mars Remote Viewing Session. During this experiment, a remote viewer was reportedly given coordinates corresponding to Mars approximately 1 million years in the past. The viewer described enormous structures resembling pyramids. They also described extremely tall humanoid beings, struggling to survive on a dying planet. Today, this document is widely circulated online. However, there is an important point that is often overlooked. The document records what a participant reported during a remote viewing session. It does not demonstrate that those descriptions were historically accurate. There is no scientific evidence that ancient civilizations existed on Mars, and no archaeological findings support the claims made during the session. The document is historically significant because it shows what was investigated, not because it verifies the extraordinary descriptions. Another frequently discussed session involved the Ark of the Covenant, the sacred chest described in the Hebrew Bible. In one remote viewing session, a participant claimed the Ark was hidden in the Middle East, inside an underground chamber protected by mysterious forces. Over the years, this story has inspired books, documentaries, and internet speculation. But once again, the evidence requires careful interpretation. The existence of a remote viewing report does not prove the location it describes. No verified archaeological discovery has confirmed the claims made during that session. The report remains an interesting historical artifact from the program, not proof that the Ark was located. This is where the story becomes genuinely fascinating. Many sessions failed, some were completely inaccurate, yet occasionally a session appeared remarkably close to the actual target. Researchers documented instances where viewers described large industrial facilities, geographical features, or pieces of equipment that seemed to resemble real locations. These successes became the strongest arguments for continuing the program. However, intelligence work demands something more than occasional success. An intelligence method must be reliable, it must produce useful information consistently. That standard would prove difficult for remote viewing to meet. Imagine tossing a coin. If it lands on heads 5 times in a row, it seems extraordinary. But if you toss it 1000 times, randomness eventually produces surprising patterns. Critics argued that remote viewing suffered from a similar problem. After conducting thousands of sessions, a handful of impressive results were almost inevitable. The real question was whether success occurred often enough to exceed what chance alone might produce. This became the central scientific disagreement. Supporters focused on the remarkable sessions. Critics focused on the much larger number of unsuccessful ones. Because both groups emphasized different parts of the evidence, they often reached opposite conclusions. Former participants have described Project STARGATE as surprisingly ordinary. There were no dramatic action scenes, no secret battles against enemy psychics. Most days involved paperwork, interviews, sketches, and lengthy discussions between analysts. Remote viewers sometimes spent hours attempting to perceive a target. Some sessions produced pages of drawings, others produced almost nothing. Analysts then compared every detail with available intelligence. It was a slow, methodical process rather than the supernatural spectacle often portrayed in popular culture. As the years passed, intelligence agencies began asking difficult questions. If remote viewing truly worked, why were results so unpredictable? Why did different viewers often describe completely different targets? Why couldn't the technique be reliably demonstrated under increasingly rigorous conditions? Supporters argued that human consciousness was too complex to behave like a machine. Skeptics argued that extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. Both sides remained convinced they were correct. Meanwhile, government officials faced a practical decision. National security depended on dependable intelligence, not intriguing possibilities. Eventually, after more than 2 decades of experiments, the program's future would depend on an independent scientific review. That review would determine whether Project STARGATE represented a revolutionary discovery or an expensive Cold War experiment that had failed to deliver consistent operational results. By the early 1990s, Project STARGATE had accumulated thousands of pages of reports, hundreds of remote viewing sessions, and decades of classified research. Some participants remained convinced they had demonstrated a genuine human ability. Many scientists remained unconvinced. The US government now had to answer a simple but critical question. Was there enough reliable evidence to justify continuing the program? In part 3, we'll examine the independent review that led to Project STARGATE's closure, what the declassified documents actually reveal, why conspiracy theories continue to surround the program, and what modern science says about remote viewing today. Was Project Stargate decades ahead of its time, or did it ultimately fail the test of scientific evidence? That's where our story reaches its conclusion.